Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, The New Face of Fraud in Financial Services, sponsored by Abnormal. My name is Carol Auth of SANS. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the Q&A window at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Mick Leach, Field CISO of Abnormal Security, Manuel Bernal, Vice President of Technology at Greylock, and Kevin Garvey, SANS Certified Instructor.
Hey, thank you so much, Carol. And it's a pleasure to be talking with all of you today about something that has really hit the financial service industry quite hard over the last few years. How easy it is for actors to be able to gain a foothold in an organization just based on something like email, right? 25% of attacks are going up over the email security concerns that financial services have. And it's really tricking people at financial service organizations. So today, I'm really excited to talk to Mick and Manuel about this in a little bit more detail, what some of the threats are, what some things that you could look for and you could take back to your organization, and some of the future threats that we're going to have to think about as well, along with some of the changes that we have within responses. So we're going to have a great interactive conversation over the next hour. And I invite everybody on the webcast to put any questions that you have into the chat, and I'll definitely ask those questions and facilitate that conversation between the three of us. A little bit of background on myself. My name is Kevin Garvey. I'm a certified SANS instructor, and I teach the Leadership 512, Security Essentials for Leadership, and Security Vulnerability Management, SEC 516, where we build up vulnerability management programs. The questions that we're going to go over today are very prevalent to what the students ask in both 512, 516, and across the SANS community. So we're going to have a lot of fun talking about that today. In parallel to my SANS work, I spent a fair amount of time at a financial institution, about 7 years, based in the New York City area, focusing on building up security operations programs, the response to situations like what we're going to be talking about today, and how to integrate that into a larger security program. And I'm helping future clients with that as well as a senior manager at WWT. I also have some experience in this area in the media industry as well, with Warner Media, and then some time at JP Morgan and New York Power Authority. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Mick to go over an introduction of yourself.
All right. Well, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it. My name is Mick Leach. I'm a field CISO here at Abnormal. Been here about 5 years, but prior to this, I've been building and leading security operations, engineering, and architecture capabilities at Fortune 500 companies for about the last, 20 years, it feels like. Or it's very close to that now. So again, primarily in the financial services and insurance industry. So been around the industry for a little while now, and then like a lifetime ago was in the United States Army for 8.5 years. So scouts out for anybody who knows what that means. But no, it's good to be here, Kevin. Happy to talk about a really big problem, kind of unpack this along with Manuel, and kind of get to the heart of the problem today.
Awesome. Great stuff, Mick. Well, hey, Manuel, I'll hand it over to you for an introduction.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kevin. Yep. So my name is Manuel Bernal. I'm the VP of Technology for Greylock Partners. I've been here for about 10 years, and I lead everything under, wear many hats, IT and security infrastructure for the firm. And prior to being at Greylock, I've been here for 10 years. And prior to that, I've worked at a number of different startups, some of which were based with like security companies like Lookout Mobile Security and Vaughn 2. But this is a topic that's top of mind for me because like email fraud and identity security are a real big focus for us, given like the sensitive deal and financial activity that flows through our firm.
Awesome, Manuel. Well, hey, Mick and Manuel, really looking forward to working with you on this today. And it's definitely top of mind to so many people within the industry. Well, I'm going to start off the conversation with just some of the tactics that have changed with what threat actors have been doing in terms of trying to knock at the door and getting a little bit better at that. From your perspective, how are some of these tactics changing? But more importantly as well, why is it so successful? And why is it so successful against financial institutions that do historically have really good security personnel, capabilities, tool sets, et cetera? Emmanuel, if you don't mind, I'll start with you, and then I'll hand over to Mick.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so the way I kind of think about it is that it's really improved, or like there's been a lot more. The threat itself has been much more targeted, very targeted to our kind of VIP, like impersonation for folks internally. I would say that where in the past it used to be kind of like a generic, email that went out and to see who clicks on a link or what have you. Now it's very targeted, and we're seeing it being a little bit more precise that way. Excuse me. Not only is it being targeted, but they're also kind of able to kind of use some pretext to understand like people that we interact with or different workflows that we're that they can understand. Like if we're talking about somebody who's like in our finance team, they understand some of those workflows. So not only are they targeted email towards them, but they understand the workflows. And they're also seeming to target like some of the tools that we use internally. So for example, like let's say DocuSign or Microsoft or all the others, they're kind of aware of these things, and so they're the context of being targeted and having the context, it makes these kind of attacks a little bit more precise.
Manuel, it's a great point there. And one of the things I did when I was in the financial services industry, I noticed that there were a lot of targeted attacks against board members, for example, against senior leaders within organizations. Have you seen something similar from your experience as well?
Yeah, yes, we have. Again, we've had situations in which our limited partners, we deal with quite a bit. Again, these folks are armed with like the information about like who we interact with, and so again, although we're kind of concerned about some of the internal emails that come to us, we actually have to be very aware about like being targeted from or our LPs being targeted or being used to kind of like infiltrate some of our infrastructure. So it's interesting because like one of the things like I think technology does a pretty good job of trying to kind of detect that, but also I think there needs to be a focus on like being able to determine when those things happen and actually kind of work with our partners and work with like internally around. Let's make sure that if something gets through, that we go through a kind of internal workflows and kind of like ensure like, yes, it's nice to have written information about here are the steps to kind of validate things, but we need some way to kind of continue. We try to do a better job of making sure that they're like the human in the loop is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing.
The humans are not removing themselves at all, it sounds like, huh?
Right.
Well, cool. Hey, Mick, I'll hand it over to you to go over that as well.
Yeah, so in terms of how things have changed over time, it's no longer just about writing better emails, right? Grammarly gave us that ability a couple of years ago, long before ChatGPT, came on the scene in November of 2022. So, it's not just about writing better emails and being more convincing, though that remains present. I think to Manuel's point here, it's better context. And so we're seeing the social engineering being used to target gaps in the process and the people and the technology. So it's about a broader set of challenges in there. And so the bad actors are tailoring their approaches to each company in terms of their vertical, in terms of their size. So as an example, one of the things that we're seeing is that the larger a company is, the less likely they are to impersonate someone in the C-suite. This is research that we've released recently because it's less likely that at a very large company you would ever have an interaction with someone on the C-suite. So when you get those kinds of emails, it seems very unrealistic that the CEO is going to reach out to me personally.
Mhm.
At a smaller company, that's much more likely. And so we see C-suite or C-level, impersonation at smaller companies being used more frequently. Whereas at large companies, they do some research with AI. Is they can now automate huge chunks of the attack lifecycle, including the recon phase. And so they can consume lots of information about a company to include kind of the hierarchical structure of the company, who works with whom. So they'll go out to maybe the finance team and they'll pull someone, a mid-level manager in that area, and then they'll use that name, they'll name drop that and either impersonate that person or just reference that person when they're sending something along. So it's this level of context that we're seeing being leveraged far more frequently and to a greater extent and to a greater effectiveness today.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. In fact, I went through an incident a few years ago where a threat actor had figured out some of the names of some of the, let's call it middle management within IT. And in IT, they
Mhm.
started reaching out to some of the other folks that would have potentially been aligned or could talk to those folks. Where do they get some of that information? Very much like to your point, probably open source intelligence going on the likes of a LinkedIn, for example. And it almost worked, right? It was
Hmm.
convincing enough, but luckily we were able to stop it before anything occurred, which is really concerning because it is really easy for not just people within their own organization, but threat actors to be able to find all this information as well. And I think that dovetails well into the next question that I have for you. And I'll start with you, Mick. Do you have some examples of what you've seen within the financial services industry of these emails causing an actual incident?
Yeah, and this is pretty common, unfortunately, right? What we're seeing today is that bad actors are preying on the trusted relationships internally at companies. And so, whether that is through trust in a senior leader at a smaller company and impersonating that leader, whether it's impersonating a trusted colleague or friend at the lower levels at a larger company, or just as we mentioned a moment ago, maybe it's name dropping someone. Oh, Nancy suggested that I reach out to you, that you would be able to help me with this problem. And that lowers the defenses in many cases for our folks because they go, oh, I know Nancy. She never would have sent you my way if there wasn't, if this wasn't already validated, in some fashion. So we're seeing bad actors do use that context that they've done in terms of the open source intelligence on the front end of things in the recon phase, and then they're leveraging that to great effect later on. And so that's where we're seeing much of the defenses that we've trained our people to be aware of. If you think about, we've told them, hey, don't take candy from strangers, don't click on links that are suspect, don't open a file from someone you don't know, right? The challenge is that those things simply aren't present most of the time anymore. Those are often brought in later in terms of the attack life cycle. But initially, what they really want to do is just open the conversation, get you talking, get
Hmm.
some sort of rapport built, and then we'll introduce a credential harvesting link or something along those lines later, that now we can get you to do something you shouldn't, or get you to click on something you shouldn't. Enter your corporate credentials, we'll scrape those. Now we've got an attack, like an account takeover in play as well. So it's a multi-stage thing that we're seeing today, and so it's not just about the credentials anymore. It's not just about getting you to pay a fraudulent invoice anymore, though those things are both present. It's actually a bigger play. They're sort of hooking these things together. If you want to think of like a the attack lifecycle being a train, and now taking these cars that for years have been historically separate cars that they focused exclusively on. Now they're hooking these cars together for a nice long attack train that allows them to various ways to get more money out of a particular company.
That's a really, really good point there. And, hey, threat actors are utilizing technology in order to be able to make this so much easier for them. But at the same time, all of these type of emails that are becoming so successful, unfortunately successful, to get into organizations, almost seems like, for lack of better terms, they're handwritten. Right? They're utilizing open source intelligence and many of the technologies that you've seen as well. Is that part of the reason why maybe sometimes the defenses are failing that we would have had in the past?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So our traditional security defense technologies have focused on a technical threat. You think of like EDR, for example, great example, and a necessary tool. Don't hear what I'm not saying. Okay, EDR is good stuff, and we should all use it. However, threat actors today understand that those technologies are quite good, and so they've learned that it's easier to hack humans than to hack systems. And so, I don't need any special hacking skills or infrastructure to pick up the phone and call someone, or to send an email to someone. So we're seeing, the threats today are less a technical threat and more of a social engineering threat. And this is
Yeah.
where, candidly, I think, and we'll talk about it, I think, a little bit later, but just to tease it out a little bit, is where security awareness training, we haven't, as security leaders, done a great job in the last 10, 15 years, keeping the training relevant and frequent enough to keep our folks trained and ready to meet the attacks that they're facing day in and day out.
And just to add on to some of these real life, events. So a couple come to mind. One is like in the past, we've had situations in which, again, these long-term conversations have gone on with our LPs. So there's been incidents in the past in which one of our LPs, their email was compromised over time, but they laid in wait. And they laid in wait until there was some type of financial transaction happening. And then what they were able to do is then kind of make some request of changing the direction, wire transfer information. So we've seen it in the past. So again, this idea about like they were able to kind of interject and build a relationship and the trust, and then they tend to wait. And another thing that just came to mind that like it happens kind of frequently. What I've noticed is that we all have new employees start. They go to LinkedIn, they update their profile and say, we've just started. And so I can't tell you how many times what we have is that we suddenly get that person's immediately, receives email saying like, hey, we have one of our partners that is asking them for some type of information. And so it happens frequently. It's these events that happen that they're aware of quickly, and they have the playbook to kind of like immediately try to see if they could compromise that. Another example is that if we talk about like any type of fundraise, for example, or anything financial, like they're aware of it and they target these types of attacks, to kind of use and utilize that to see if they could actually gain some type of compromise.
Manuel, you hit on a really good point there, especially getting into a new organization or making a change on a LinkedIn profile. I did that recently, and something happened very similar to what you just talked about. I got these whole cornucopias of messages from people giving me congratulations, and I had never met them before. And looking at what they were doing is they were copying and pasting the title, what was on LinkedIn, putting it into a message that was over to me, which I found really scary from a cybersecurity perspective because it reminded me we tend to not have visibility into this as cybersecurity leaders and professionals. And you've probably seen it as well. Is there any recommendation you would give to those within financial services of where our tool sets really don't have that visibility, such as like what you brought in with LinkedIn? What are some things that we could do to help our folks, be aware of something like this?
Yeah, I would the word I'd come up with is just awareness. Like we try to do a pretty good job of a kind of initial orientation and letting them know what to expect. And because we understand that is something that seems to happen more frequently, we're just adding it onto the onboarding. So there's frequently a lot of training as they come on board and say, here's what to expect, and actually provide them with examples. It's always great where we show them like, here's an example of one that just came in for you or somebody that previously had just started with our firm. We're also trying to do a better job of being able to do just-in-time type of education and training. Even if we were able to stop something like this coming in, which we typically do, we tend to then like communicate that out to either individuals or people that play the same type of role, or again, somebody like new hires like who's just come on board within the last 90 days. We kind of make it a point to kind of like do a kind of a drip campaign and continue to educate them, saying like we are a target and it's not going to stop, and so always be suspicious. So I think it's this constant training, constant real world examples is what we've been kind of trying to do a much better job of.
Cool. No, I appreciate
Yeah, if I can tag in on the end of that, just to say I wholeheartedly agree that relevancy and timeliness in terms of training need to be better. And the other thing that I would add for security teams is to link in with the communications team. This is primarily for our financial services folks. In my experience, the larger the company, the more siloed the different capabilities that you have are. And so I know when I was at a Fortune 500 bank, there were many times that the marketing team or the communications team was putting information out that we didn't know was happening. And so what that happens though is bad actors are consuming all of this information. They're understanding what's happening, and then they're going to create an attack plan based on that new information. Manuel just talked about, fundraising is a perfect example in the startup community. If you got fundraising going on, bad actors see that. They're going to target, they're going to try because listen, there's a lot of money flowing when that's happening. And they're going to try and get their paws in there and pull some of that back to themselves. The same happens for state and local governments when contracts are bidded on, and that stuff is going out there for construction, those kinds of things for education, when a new school is going to be built, when a new building's built, and also in financial services when M&A, for example, right? If there's a new merger and acquisition, bad actors are watching for these kinds of things. They're reading the 10Ks, right? They're reading all of these this information that's being put out there. So if your security team is not aware of what the communications team or the marketing teams are putting out there, there's a really significant gap that bad actors are going to leverage. So security teams, make sure you're reading your own 10Ks. Make sure you're reading your quarterly reports, because bad actors are, and they're creating attacks designed directly to those.
It's a really, really good point and a takeaway for everyone on here. I think that's great for all security leaders and practitioners. Keeping on the financial services area for a second, financial services, especially with security, they're known for having great people, process, and technology. They have the best of breed for everything I just covered. Yet there are still attacks that occur. Why is that? And Mick, if you don't mind, I'm going to start with you and then hand over to Manuel.
Sure. Yeah. And I think I touched on it before. You're right. We've spent in Fortune 500, organizations, we've spent a lot of money on upper right quadrant, the best of the best technology, tens of millions of dollars our budgets are. I've been there, I've done that, and you're right. And the same goes with processes and the people, right? We've done good things there. The challenge is that it's not one of these areas necessarily that bad actors are focusing on. What they're focusing on is it's more around a sequencing problem. They're leveraging the gaps in the process. For example, if you don't have some sort of callback verification before you pay out a large sum of money in the finance team, bad actors will lean into that and try and get you to move quickly and pay out very quickly without validating something. Maybe it's technology gaps in terms of not having some sort of behavioral baselines around what normal looks like in your environment, both in terms of who your folks are and how they work and where they work from, but also who they work with and what that timing looks like. They exploit those as well. And then lastly, they do exploit the good nature of our employees. You see, it's bad actors aren't dumb, okay? They're very smart, and they spend the time that they need to target our people, and they deliberately target folks who work in an industry, in an area where customer service is part of what they do. And so if you're paid and you are rated quarterly, annually on your ability to service those around you well, provide great customer service, solve problems, bad actors understand that. And so they're going to target those folks and try and exploit the good nature of people and their desire to help. I need your help are four of the most powerful words in the human language, because we are predisposed to answer that call for help, to try and support someone. And so bad actors know that, and they're going to exploit that. So it's not just people, process, technology, it's the gaps that fall in between those three, in my experience. Manuel, what do you think? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I largely agree. I feel like as though that again, I agree where I feel pretty comfortable. Like I have all the best in breed tools, like defense in depth is there, and I feel like I feel like I've leaned in, and most people lean into the technology and saying, "Boy, look, I have some statistics that show me that I'm really blocking most of just about everything, almost 100%." And I think that it needs that focus needs to shift a little bit more on kind of more of the process of like, let's just kind of think about it this way: is nothing's gonna be 100%. Something will get through. So what do we need to do? What are the areas that we need to focus on? And as Mick mentioned, it's around like again this process and saying like, what is the process? If there's going to be like, for example, a change to kind of like a wiring instruction, what have you. It may be written down, but there needs to be something that is actually verified. Like, are we going through that process? So I think it's, again, being able to trust but verify these really important type of core type of workflows. And then the other thing too, again, I completely agree when we're talking about they tend to pull at people's need to kind of like from customer service, or just saying, again, back to my example of like we have a new employee, they get an email from a partner and they're put under pressure, like, we need you to do the following things right now. We see that quite often. And again, as a new employee, they don't have the context and they want to be able to say, like, I'm going to respond to this person. And again, the bad actors they understand that pressure, and they really they're able to really be effective with it. So again, it really goes back to for me to thinking about like, what do we do to reduce that blast radius, or I should say more about the kind of workflow process, and could we kind of validate and make sure that people are following those processes, and plus, being able to try to educate people and inform them, like, these are the types of, when you get a request in which you feel like you're pressured, that you need to act quickly, stop and think for a moment, okay, this is exactly what they're attempting to do, and to report it as soon as possible.
Yeah, you bring up an interesting point there about, hey, take a little bit of a stop, right? One of the things that I had recommended to the folks at the financial organizations is to, something does seem fishy, trust your gut, right? And when you trust your gut, maybe you take a bit of a pause, very much like what you said. Maybe give somebody a call. And in fact, I remember having to deal with a situation a few years ago where I got a message that looked like it was from somebody I should trust, but the message was just a little off. And what I mean by that is the ask was a little off. Everything else about it was perfectly fine. But when I looked at it, like, this isn't something I would normally be asked for. So I got on the phone and I called this person who supposedly sent me this message. And not surprisingly, it was not that person that sent that message. And that might be, that's a great point of just take a bit of a pause. Even if it's a 5-second pause, it can mean the difference between an incident to something that could prevent a particular incident as well.
Yeah, during the orientation, like, I use the words, like, if your spidey senses are going off, report it. Like, we tend to be very good about letting them know, like, if you have that concern like this, the spidey sensors going off, we make sure that they're aware of, like, how to report it. Like, take that pause, and even just feel free to, reach out to us and we'll get back to you. And again, understanding what steps that they should be taking to kind of just to verify that the email itself is legitimate.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of time saves a lot of resources, right? And sorry, Mick, go ahead.
No, just to tag into that, I think culturally, though, we have to create an environment where that is okay.
Mm.
Because too often, especially really large financial services companies, I've been there, I get it. You're trying to move quickly. But we need to work at the highest levels, from C-suite down, push this down to say, at any level, if this doesn't feel right, stop what you're doing, pick up the phone, use a different, right? If they called you, maybe we send them an email, right? Or whatever, maybe you send them a Slack or a Teams message. Either way, use a different communication channel, change it entirely, reach out to the person, validate that. But because this is what you guys are saying, I agree wholeheartedly, that's the right approach. But we need to make sure that we're creating a culture that supports this.
Mm-hmm.
Because too often I hear about folks from financial services industries that say, I would absolutely love to do that, but I know I'll get yelled at, right? I just didn't move quickly enough. So you have to create a culture that says, listen, if you're not sure, pause, pick up the phone, do whatever you need to do to validate that what you've been asked to do is the right thing to do before you act. And it starts with leaders. So leaders, if you're listening, lean in, hear what we're saying. You've got to create this culture where that's okay, right? If you pause 5 seconds, you can save a lot of money down the road. Okay, so just hear what we're saying. This is good stuff.
One thing just to add to that as well, I think that we need to really importantly allow for our customers, our internal customers, to feel comfortable reporting these things. I've heard often, like, well, I didn't want to bug you, or I don't know if you were busy, what have you. So it's not only just like reporting what's going on, and making people feel comfortable doing it. I can tell you that a vast majority of the people who report things to me, they do it because I encourage them to do it. I'm like, even if you have the smallest inklings, just send it to us. It doesn't take us too much time to determine if this is something that we should be concerned about. And regardless, again, like, most of these are not malicious at all. They're not phishing attempts, what have you. But we always get back to them and thank them for reporting it. And so again, this culture of, like, please report it, and we're happy to kind of investigate this, because it plays long-term dividends for sure.
I really like that. And it goes into, especially going back over to financial services for a second. Hey, they've got great people, process, and technology, just like we talked about a little bit earlier, yet the threats are still coming in. Is there a prioritization change that needs to occur for security teams? And if so, what is that? And Manuel, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I do. I think, again, I would just encourage people to be a little bit more, a little bit more, open to kind of like working and understanding that we want to make sure that the customers that we're supporting, they feel comfortable reaching out to us. And so it's a little bit like leaning into this customer service kind of attitude of like, we want them to report it. So we want them to feel comfortable about, reporting it to us or come to see us and kind of interacting with us. That building that trust, and that, it starts with communication, and being able to feel as though like if I'm going to report something, I'm not going to get reprimanded or feel like I'm bugging somebody. But I think that's an important shift, because again, it goes back to this thing where I feel like there's times that it's easy to kind of focus very much on the technology. Like I have everything in place, what have you. But I think more and more we're starting to see like we need to have more of that, human centric type of like, communication and trust. I think that's really important. And I think that I would encourage everybody to lean to that.
It's interesting that you bring that up because many, many moons ago, when I was running a particular SOC, we had in there the phishing responses where people report phishing emails. However, the email was based on whatever the SOC analyst felt was the appropriate response. Well, as all of you on the call probably know, sometimes, those are different types of responses. And I'll never forget, I looked at one of the responses and it said, "This is clearly not a phishing email. Please read again what phishing emails are." I'm like, oh, no, no, no. We want to really maintain that culture. And well, like what you were saying a little bit earlier, and it's easy to sort of say that, very hard to be able to put into practice many at times as well. And it's really good to hear that from your perspective too. And Mick, I'd love to hear from your side, prioritization changes. What are some things that can really grow the financial services world, especially in the security area, to be able to maybe start tackling some of these threats and reprioritize appropriately?
Yeah, so maybe at the risk of jarringly changing direction a little bit, I think because we've talked a lot about the email space and social engineering and these are all good things. I think another area that could use a little more prioritization is around the third party risk management space. And here's why. Uh, We have historically treated this as a one-time pass-fail at onboarding a brand new, third-party, vendor or partner of some sort, and that works great. The problem is after that, I mean, you only bring them on once ever, and then you have these long-term relationships, 5, 10 years with a particular company, and we never revisit that in many cases. The best solutions or the best organizations that I've run across will typically see revisit that annually. Great, but I think it needs to be more. It needs to be better. It needs to be continuous posture management with third party risk. So we need to be really maintaining an understanding of what that relationship looks like, where the linking occurs in our systems, both from a technological perspective, but also from a people and a process perspective as well. And understand where those could be perhaps attacked, because rest assured, and Manuel talked about this at the beginning to an extent, is around like vendor email compromise. We definitely see bad actors targeting our vendors and our
Mhm.
partners, seeing that as a way into the organization. And I think that still comes back to kind of a third party risk management, gap that we've got to close that down. So maintaining continuous posture management on those third parties and what they're doing, what normal looks like from the behavior of those relationships. The second aspect that I think we can do better, and again, Manuel, I'm just going to step on your coattails all day, okay? Because you've been giving great stuff. So sorry, it feels like I don't have an original thought, but it's around security awareness training, right? It's got to be better. Our accounts payable teams, our treasury teams, they face a very different threat than the rest of our general employee population, okay? And the training needs to reflect that. And it doesn't in many cases today. We send out this generic phishing simulation that says something. The problem is it often is the one size fits hardly anyone. at least in my experience, right? Because here's an example, right? We may do a DocuSign, kind of a phishing simulation, which is great. That's going to definitely get my legal team. It's going to get, my finance team. They're used to seeing DocuSigns and they may click on it. Fine. The problem is most of the rest of the company does not have signature authority for anything, and they're going to get this and go, what is this? I don't. This is clearly a phishing simulation. I'm not authorized to sign anything. So they just laugh. And so you're going to get a very narrow sliver. The other option is like your technical staff, your engineering staff. You're going to send them like an AWS elevated login, anomalous activity was observed on your AWS login. And they're going to go, oh, well, that's scary. Click here to see the logs and review them and see if this was your activity. And you're going to get them because they're going to click on that and want to know what happened. But then your finance team and your accounts payable team is going to look at that and go, what is this? AW Oz? What is Oz? Right? So, and I only say that because I've experienced this firsthand. So we've got to do better in terms of making security awareness training targeted to people's roles, their functions, and then picking simulations that make sense for their roles, and then also doing it at a cadence that makes sense. Quarterly, which is what most of us do, isn't frequent enough. Okay, I'm just being honest. It doesn't really prepare them for what happens. Lastly, I know I've been talking for a moment, so apologize for that. But I think this is also important. Lastly, it has to not be punitive in nature, because if you're the best way to alienate your employees is to create an adversarial relationship between security and the rest of the company. So don't do that. Don't have a punitive phishing program where when they fail, they get a slap on the wrist, they get a sternly worded email, HR potentially gets involved, their managers involved. Like all you're doing is showing them not to ask questions. Don't rock the boat. Don't mess up. And instead, you're teaching them to pass a test, not to be secure. And that's not effective in the long run. So be aware of that. We've got to change security awareness training. It's got to be better. It's got to be more relevant. It's got to be more timely. Thank you.
Sorry. Yeah, great stuff there. And there's a few items in the Q&A as well that I'll get to. So Katrina says, hey, so glad to hear examples about changing culture. So Katrina, really happy to hear that you like that. Another example I'll give as well, Nick, you were just talking about how sometimes there's an adversarial relationship between security teams and, well, every other team out there, right? And one of the things I always like to say within the class, within 512 and 516, is if you were to ask anybody what the security team does, they many of times think that we're all pen testers, no matter what we actually do, that we're all sitting there trying to hack away at certain systems, right? And I bring that up because to help change the culture of security, we got to get our faces out there. We have to get our names out there. And one of the things that I did that worked really well for me, and I invite anybody on the webinar to take away, we had a few lunch and learns, but in those lunch and learns, it wasn't going into ransomware type attacks. It was who we are, who are the folks within security, what do we do? Like really making it more of a one-on-one type of conversation to really reintroduce yourselves to the organization. And importantly, making sure that you're telling folks, we're here to help you be successful, right? Yes, there will be some times we have to say no at for things, but a lot of times that's probably if we get brought in at the very, very end. We could be brought in, I heard Shift left a little bit earlier, we could be brought in to be able to make you successful, to get to what your business goals are, and also to do it securely too. And one other one I'll put out here, and Manuel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Hey, one of the best ways to perform this type of viewpoint of how to become better of what we're talking about is do an enterprise-wide audit with a fraud focus, including business email compromise. Would love to get your thoughts on that from one of the attendees on our webinar. How do you feel, an internal or external audit may be able to help out in terms of like maybe reprioritization or helping out with the people, process, and technology at financial services firms?
Yeah, again, I think that having that information, again, I think we're all kind of agreeing that like in the past, what we've done is like, hey, you have an onboarding kind of session around like security training, and then we're going to do something that is kind of time-based. We'll do it quarterly, yearly, what have you. And again, I couldn't agree more. We got to get away from that type of mentality. We got to be more about like, event-driven type of, targeted training. So yeah, I think that again, with some of the tools that we have right now, we're able to kind of like, again, I would say that instead of going from these kind of quarterly type of training, it actually should just be based on event. And we've had that happen in the past where we're able to look at our tools and immediately see a spike. Something has changed, whether it's like we announce something internally or publicly, I should say. And so the attackers are aware of it. And so they go in and do their thing. Or it could be just like a security issue or security vulnerability that has been just announced. So I think that is the new way to go. I think it's going to be not only just the events are going to be seeing a change in what is happening. What are we seeing within our own data? Like what are the type of attacks that we're seeing? And the better idea that we have about what they are and who they're targeting, then the training itself is going to even be better. So I think that's kind of the trend that we're going towards. Again, Kevin, you were mentioning this idea about like, putting kind of a face to the security team and having this idea about like, having them sit down in a brown bag and talking about who they are and what they do and what their focus is. I think that's a fantastic idea. I would also encourage to ask for feedback about like, hey, what things could we be doing better? How can we improve our communication? Have we ever made you feel as though I was in trouble? Like, again, this is all around trying to build that trust, because the greater the trust, the better type of reporting you're going to get, the better training that's going to be delivered to your customers. So I couldn't agree with you more on that. And again, one last thing you were saying that I talk about quite often is that we certainly want to be careful about being IT or security, what have you, being a team of no. I tend to say like it's okay to say no, but give some context around why. Like I think that's really important. Like if we're going to ask, or if something is happening in which we do have to say no, there's a way to deliver it where it's not necessarily coming across that way. I think it's really important to, again, educate people and trust that like they're going to understand what's going on. And I think that's a really important focus that needs to happen.
It's a really, really good call out. Hey, Nick, I got a question for you.
Sure.
Hey, folks within financial services, especially within cybersecurity teams, they've done a lot of great work over the last few years of increasing communication beyond just, let's call it the silo of the cybersecurity team. But as we could tell, it's not solving every last threat that's being seen across an entire organization. From your vantage point, are there other stakeholders that you would recommend a cybersecurity team to engage with a little bit more, to talk to communicate, especially about threats like what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, and this one's deeply personal to me because when I've served in security roles at really big companies, typically the biggest challenge is security isn't very well tied to the way the business works, the way the business makes money. We are really good at security, but if we're coming up with rules, and this is kind of to Manuel's point here a moment ago, if we're coming up with the rules and we're saying no to things just because that is not the best security practice, but it doesn't actually support the business and the way we make money, then it's not going to be sustainable, right? Listen, users like life find a way, the old Jurassic Park, quote, life finds a way. Listen, our users find a way too. And so if we throw up roadblocks of, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, they're going to find a way around them that's probably worse. So when we say no, and sometimes we do have to, we need to make sure that we're giving them an alternative method that helps them achieve their business goal. So in terms of like getting other stakeholders, right, to bring it back to the question here, I think we as security leaders need to go out and understand how the business works. What are the critical business functions that need to operate for us to make money? Because all of us, we don't all work at security companies. In fact, very few of us do. So our company makes money a different way. And so we need to understand how that works. And then we need to get the leaders over those critical business functions on board. We need to get them on board so they understand, what we're doing, the security aims, what we're trying to secure, why it's important, and then let them have a seat at the table and weigh in on, okay, I understand now that doesn't work, fine, but we still need to do this thing. So you need to give us a way for us to accomplish that. Otherwise, and we've seen this before, right? This is how shadow IT, shadow AI becomes a problem because someone with a corporate card is going to go buy a service online, a SaaS service or now an AI service, and not tell you about it. And so now we have a new attack surface that we don't even know about, we can't defend. So, this is where we've got to make sure that we're bringing everybody to the table that needs a seat at the table and give them the ability to weigh in. I think that will help us build better defensive, more comprehensive defensive programs.
To pull on that string a little bit as well, there have been some leaders who have really tried integrating with business units, and almost always there's some point of friction along the way. Business units have uptime requirements, or they have monetary requirements, et cetera, right? Are there key challenges that you've seen to grow those relationships, especially from the security team outbound? And if so, are there some things that you'd recommend to security leaders to really bend and grow that relationship?
Sure, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, security is typically diametrically opposed, right? That is the polar opposite of many other organizations, right? I use, this is a little bit of an old school mentality, but the old network team, right? Network's job was to make things talk. Security's job was to make the right things talk. So, there sometimes can be a tension. We want it to be a healthy tension, but it's not always a healthy tension. But there needs to be a healthy tension between what security is doing and what the other organizations in the company are doing. So there is absolutely a way to do that. I think it's just really, it comes down to communication, getting everybody on the same page, giving them the ability to weigh in, those kinds of things. Because yes, there is the goal of security is often at odds to some extent with the rest of the company. I think if we had our way, this is why we don't get to always make all the choices, because if we had our way, we would just shut everything off. Like, we're not going to communicate with anybody. We're not going to have email. We're just going to sit in our box. It's the most secure we could possibly be. You're welcome. The business will say that's a great way to go out of business. So that doesn't make sense for us. So we have to make concessions. We as security leaders, that is our job, is to support the business by advising on how we can do business as secure as we possibly can. But we have to make concessions, and we don't get to have it our way all the time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Manuel, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's really important because, again, I think that you want to avoid these shadow IT events, which happen all the time. So, again, I think that's what happens where there's not necessarily a trust there. There's not a communication channel between security and other business units. So, for me, I think it's really important when I talk to, whether you're in security or in technology in general, it's like, I think going forward, building relationships and trust are so important because one, I think that for me and others, it's going to allow us to understand how the business functions. There's many times that I go in there and I start to begin to learn and put pieces together about how a workflow, whether through process or through applications and services. Having that awareness makes me a better leader and better come up with better solutions, whether that's like, hey, we should be using a particular technology, or we shouldn't be using something, or we already have something in place, so you don't have to go out and buy something on the credit card, as Mick was suggesting, which I've seen that happen all the time. So I think that I think that's probably a hat that some of us are not really kind of used to, but we really need to start to do that. There's just such a big benefit of understanding, again, having that visibility about like those workflow flows. And again, we have technology that, and dashboards that let us know like who's being targeted and how are they being targeted. And so being able to have that type of information, and when I'm talking with somebody in different business units, it's really powerful to kind of say like, hey, here's what we're seeing, how you guys are being targeted. Here's some of the events that we're seeing, and here's why we're making some decisions. So I think that, every point that Mick brought up is really important.
Well, Manuel, shifting a little bit more to the technology side, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Hey, AI, obviously top of mind to enormous amount of security organizations right now. But we could also utilize it as a bit of a technology accelerator. And just talking about all the threats that we've been chatting about over the last 50 minutes or so, what can security teams do to utilize AI to be something that's going to help build up the defenses for financial services organizations?
Yeah, I think that from my experience, what's been great is that, in the past, I think that there's been some time to actually look and review incidents and then actually get to a point where you're remediating and finding out what you need to do. And there was like, for me, honestly, there used to be like days that would go on. Now, internally using some of these tools, that remediation time has actually just been reduced. And so we're able to find out pretty quickly about like the risk and how susceptible we may be. So being able to kind of like get that information quickly has been invaluable. But I still think it's interesting. We still need that human in the loop to kind of review all these things. So again, I think it's like less around trying to identify the threat that's happening and what type of action and the priority of it. Getting that information quickly has been fantastic. I mean, some of the tools that are out there now provide you that information within minutes, if not sooner, so that you can kind of focus more on the things that we were just describing. One, again, like understanding those threats and being able to remediate or get ahead of this quicker. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up there about where the human in the loop is. And a recommendation I'd give to everybody is to really define that within your organization. Where does the human come into the loop? Where is the human reviewing any of the outputs or potentially some of the decisions that are being made from agentic models as well? One of the things that I've been focusing on a lot, especially within 512 and 516, is just understanding, especially from a security leadership perspective, that we're managing people, we're managing the technologies, but we're also managing potentially some of the decisions that are coming out from AI as well. And just like decisions that are made from people, sometimes those decisions don't mesh with what our requirements are. And especially within financial institutions, there's going to be more and more of this buildup of not just AI, but agentic-based decision making. And we need to pull that into our conversations as leaders to really be able to help out with stuff like what you just talked about a little bit as well. And hey, Mick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too.
Yeah, I mean, whenever we talk about AI, I think it's important that we frame it first on how we've been doing things for the last 20 plus years. Signature-based detection, where we define what evil looks like, and then we search for that definition of what evil looks like in our environments. This is how we've done security for the past 20 years. The problem is that it's not very effective when every attack now, thanks to AI, can be a zero-day attack, right? Because with infrastructure as code, thanks to AWS, we can now stand up attack infrastructure, net new, never seen before. There is no threat intel on this infrastructure. There's no reputation checking for this IP because it's never been used by this particular actor before. So, in other words, every attack can now be and is often a novel attack. So, if that's the case, signature-based detection is not very effective in these kinds of threats. So going forward, this is where I think bad actors, let's be clear, are using AI today. We know that. We've talked about this. And I don't want to belabor that point, but the reality is that we as defenders need to be harnessing the power of AI as well. If you think about machine learning, for example, what it was purpose built for, right? It's kind of the original AI. It was consuming tons and tons of data and then identifying sort of the thread of truth that runs through it all. And that's really where AI native solutions live, is on that machine learning capability, the ability to consume tons of information and now create these baselines of what normal looks like. And once you know what normal looks like, then unusual activity jumps off the page at you. And if you're a SANS person, you know this because we've been doing this for 20 plus years in the network detection and response space, right? You think of like Zeek before it became, it was Bro first and now it's Zeek and fine, right? That the ability to identify beaconing behaviors because it was anomalous. The reality is we couldn't do that in the application space until just recently, right? When machine learning grew up, when compute got cheaper and storage got cheap, finally we could start to do that same level of anomaly detection, baselining what normal looks like, and then anomaly detection after that. We could only do that recently. And that's what our tools should be doing. Anything that you buy now, going forward in any of the spaces, right? It's beyond email. Right now, we're talking vulnerability detection. We're talking about EDR has been doing this for decades, a decade. But we should be looking for solutions that are AI native, that are doing behavioral based detection, right? That identify normal and then detect on deviations from norm. That is the key going forward, in my opinion.
Agree.
I think it's a really good call. Manuel, do you want to add something else there?
No, I just gonna say I agree. I think that like again, things are coming fast and furious now, and so like these tools are helping us address that. So I couldn't agree more. Another thing too is that like I feel like as though some of these tools are also helping me become not just reactive but proactive. A lot of the things that I'm starting to see is some tools that allow me to see some proactive measures based on different tools that I could take now where there's no event. But I couldn't agree more with Mick about that. So
Well, hey, I
Yeah,
think that especially the conversation with AI, what are some of the emerging threats that you're seeing from your vantage point, especially based on the topics that we're talking about, email security and how successful it's been? Where is AI potentially going? And also, where are the emerging threats going in this space as well? And then, well, if you don't mind, I'll start with you.
yeah, no, I think again, like deep fakes, being able to kind of take somebody's voice and kind of use that during kind of a kind of an attack process. I think that what I've been hearing quite a bit is that there'll be kind of multi-channel type of attack. So again, we'll hear about people saying like, I got an email asking for a particular request, and then guess what? At the same time, I'm getting a text message, at the same time saying, hey, again, about around the urgency of like, hey, did you get my email that I sent? And again, there's been publicly, disclosed incidents where there's been deepfake Zoom, where they could kind of take over somebody's own identity and their voice. So those are the things that we're trying to get ahead of, and I know that those are the ones that we're quite worried about. And again, at the currently what we're trying to do is just educate. It goes back to the education, the trust that we have within our customers internally, and letting them know like here are some threats that are coming out that we want you to be aware of, and here are the exact examples. Again, when some of these were publicly announced, some of these incidents, we immediately just kind of blasted it out and said like we want everybody aware that these are the types of things that are going on. And again, goes back to that. If you have some spidey sense of like this is strange, this request I just got from one of our managing partners, go with that gut feeling and report it.
No, it's really good stuff. And Nick, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, just to echo what Manuel's talking about, I think sophistication is going to continue to elevate. I think AI is powering that. I think more than that too is scale, right? I think that's where we see AI really come into its own, is in terms of scaling the attacks. A good friend of mine, FC Barker, Freaky Clown is his hacker alias. He talks about how it used to take 40 hours of recon before you would build like a really sophisticated spear phishing email to attack a particular company. And that's 40 hours per person that you investigate. It's now down to less than a minute. And so if you think about that, and that's because you can automate with AI all of the reconnaissance, open source intelligence. You can go out and give it tasks to go out and go out and look at LinkedIn, go out and look at Twitter, go out and do all of these things. And it will do that and then bring back the results. But now you can even automate the consumption of the results and then suggest an attack method. So this is what allows bad actors to scale up their attacks to levels we simply never seen before. And this is why I again argue that we as defenders need to be harnessing the power of AI in terms of defense. Because if AI is going to come for you, then AI should also be defending you. I think that's really the only way that we can match the scalability of the attacks, is with the scalability of our defense.
Nick, I think that's a great thing, and that should be something that's framed on a lot of security teams' wall. I think that's a great takeaway for everybody, especially knowing that a lot of folks are dealing with these types of questions right now. Well, hey, Mick and Manuel, this has been absolutely wonderful. Really appreciate your time going into the threats that you're seeing and how that affects the financial services organizations, and some great takeaways for everybody on the webinar as well. And again, thank you for everybody on the webinar. I appreciated the questions and your time. If you have any other questions, feel free to let us know in the Q&A. And of course, this webinar will be available online as well for you to be able to take a look at a later point. And with that, again, thank you so much, Mick and Manuel. This was wonderful. I'm going to hand it back over to Carol.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin, Mick, and Manuel, for this great presentation, and to Abnormal for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.